Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Critical Weight Theory, where I sometimes dive deep into the pressing political, cultural, and philosophical questions of our time. Today, we're tackling a topic that's both urgent and nuanced. What is the essence of the liberal conservative divide in the United States today? So it's a little bit of a meat and potatoes sort of question, a little bit on the generic side even, but it's one that we should come back to every so often. So not too long ago I might have answered this question very differently. The landscape of political conflict seemed clearer, rooted in ideological differences over policy, culture, and governance. But today the divide has shifted profoundly. So let's explore how. And for starters, one of the main points I would raise is that the divide is actually, in some ways, perversely not as stark as it might seem, because the overall culture is shifting too far to the far right. So that is the changing nature of the divide. In its current form, the conflict pits two almost starkly different visions for the future, although it's an illusion, the difference in many respects. They're different but the same. One really just feeds into the other. So, on one side, we have a sort of conservatism that's increasingly defined by its belief in attaining a utopia, one achieved through a form of authoritarian rule embodied by the idea of a Trumpian dictatorship. This vision seeks to reshape society from the top down, at least in most respects, enforcing strict controls to create its version of order and prosperity, which will, of course, leave a lot of people out of the picture. There are a lot of people they don't want to be prosperous, and that they, in fact, make a point to cast out and demonize. And on the other side, we have what might best be described as a business as usual approach, a corporate oligarchy maintaining its grip on power under the veneer of moderate liberal democracy. Although, as I implied already, that is largely an illusion because so many of the people who have been in that camp are ceding ground to the supposed opposition, which is really, you know, the dominant force at the moment. So, this business as usual side doesn't promise utopia exactly, it promises continuity of existing norms, albeit with some concessions to public sentiment to maintain legitimacy among more moderate or middle ground types of Americans. But here's the thing: neither side leaves much room for a gray area. It's not moderate. Both would surrender this country to corporate interests and disempower the vast majority of people. It would put a lot of people's rights on the chopping block and, frankly, just rely on a lot of lies, a lot of bizarre claims, and plenty of points of view that would be omitted from the discussion entirely in the media representation and on the agenda. So the middle ground is disappearing, and with it, the space for nuanced debate or compromise. So that brings up another interesting point because the economy is global. Escape isn't that much of an option. And recently, I had sort of I almost like a debate with somebody online, and they were ostensibly on the left, and they basically bashed me for, you know, pointing out that people should consider leaving the country if they can. And I'll create an episode on that in the future. But it's one of those things where I do understand why somebody might have taken issue with what I said, but at the same time, what I said should not have cast me in a villain role. Yet they were trying to, sort of demonize me uh, as some sort of, you know, bad person for suggesting that people should consider leaving if they can. And I understand that. And in a lot of ways, escape isn't an option. And in a lot of people's lives, they can't leave. They can't flee to some other country or something along those lines. So, it's tempting to look at this, supposed binary choice between more overt dictatorship and business as usual and want to opt out entirely. After all, isn't there a third way? Couldn't we just disengage, go off grid, and live independently of these systems? No, maybe some of us can, but not everybody could. So while appealing in theory, the reality is far more complicated. One of the defining characteristics of authoritarian regimes, whether fascist or otherwise, is their expansionist nature. They're not content to let you be. These systems are built to seek control, to grow, and to dominate every sphere of life. Escape, as romantic as it sounds, is increasingly difficult, if not impossible. At the same time, of course, there are people who would be better off if they, you know, found or sought out areas of the world that were perhaps more to their liking, or however you want to phrase it, just safer for them. So really what's going on is the public battle for power, while a lot of the interests are converging and excluding groups that they seek to dominate and control, and it's a divide and conquer sort of state of affairs. So, what makes today's divide even more precarious is the reliance on both sides, or of both sides, on public engagement or perhaps public manipulation. For the pro authoritarian movement to succeed, or the more overtly pro authoritarian movement to succeed, it needs to cultivate widespread enthusiasm, mobilizing its base into a unified, fervent force. Meanwhile, the corporate oligarchy's strategy is more subtle. It's like I said, the oligarchy is a part of that movement, yet there's sort of a moderate wing of it, and it's trying to be more subtle in its approach and offer people, you know, some of the revolution and the revolution insurance by maintaining some of the old ways, I suppose you might say, like, maybe we shouldn't get rid of the Department of Education. Maybe we should have some environmental regulations, moderate things like that. Maybe we shouldn't get rid of the polio vaccine, as another example. You know, it's trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But at the same time, like I said, it's still, despite those differences, ceding ground to the more extreme section of the authoritarian or corporate oligarchy movement. So the more moderate wing, I think its success hinges on keeping the public sufficiently distracted and disengaged as it consolidates power, whether through monopolistic practices, wealth accumulation, or political influence. It must avoid sparking backlash because it wants to preserve a more moderate order. So that's why some elements of it will still criticize the more extreme components of the authoritarian movement, the corporate extreme, the religious right extreme. This means maintaining the illusion of a competitive economy and a functioning democracy, even as those systems become increasingly hollow. That's one of the almost laughable aspects of it, as a lot of compromises are made along the way, including in the corporate media. There's less and less of a moderate path forward because for them, moderate simply means agreeing with the status quo and the sort of extreme direction that they're heading in. So here's the catch, though: the illusion is getting harder to sustain. With corporations growing ever larger and more monopolistic, the cracks are becoming harder to ignore, and as these cracks widen, so does the potential for unrest. So, what are the implications for us then? Where does that leave us? In many ways, we're left navigating a political and social landscape that offers no easy answers. On one side, there is an authoritarian vision of utopia that's actually nightmarish dystopia. And on the other hand, there's a system clinging to legitimacy while perpetuating inequality and consolidation of power while still retaining some, at least vague, elements of moderation. But recognizing this dynamic is the first step to understanding it and perhaps challenging it as individuals, as communities, and as a society. We have to ask ourselves, how do we confront these forces? How do we advocate for a future that prioritizes things like justice, equality, and freedom without falling into the traps of either authoritarianism or unchecked corporate dominance, which again are feeding into each other, but they can be somewhat different. There's again a relatively moderate wing, and a more overtly, unapologetically extreme wing. So, as far as I'm concerned, the only way forward is for people to sort of try to create an alternative from the bottom up, sort of an alternative economy, different different modes of doing things, I suppose you might say. And that's not just a part-time job either. It's sort of got to be reflected in people's understanding of the world. We have to question more of the world around us, like the nature of the economy, the nature of governance, you know, national borders, the nature of law, all of those things, which you don't have to be a radical to even question. Those are things we should be questioning right off the bat because we have brains. You know, that's how things are supposed to work. So at the end of the day, that's really one of the main things that matters. You have to question the most common things around you, the mundane and the everyday, and you have to be able to say at certain times, this is wrong. I'm not gonna support this, and yeah, you have to call out some BS. That's how a lot of things are gonna have to be. So, well, that's about all I have to say for right now. So, thanks for joining me on this little deep dive into the essence of the liberal conservative divide today. These are difficult times, but understanding the complexities of our moment is the first step toward meaningful change. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and subscribe, share, and leave a review if you are so inclined. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can comment on This if you found it on YouTube or something like that. So, what do you think of this divide? Let me know on social media or in those comments. And until next time, stay thoughtful, stay informed, and stay engaged, and in some cases, stay enraged.